Hey, what's up? So we're going to talk about nesting and collapsing tracks in Avid. One thing to think about is there's this little button called collapse, which I normally put it onto one of my rows there. I don't use it as a keyboard shortcut. I don't use it that much. But the idea of collapsing tracks is the idea of, let's say we have these three tracks right here. One is a video underneath a mat key underneath a graphic, right? And if I hit the collapse button here, what Avid's going to do is take those three tracks and make it into one. So how do I look and see what's inside that track? There are two ways. One is these little buttons down here, step in, step out. So if I step in, now I'm going to see what's sort of in that little nested sequence, right? It has four tracks. You actually could add a track. I hit Control Y. I could add a track even though it's underneath, right? It doesn't add a track here. It's still underneath V1. Could add effects on top of that if you want to. And you have everything what you had underneath. The other way to actually look and see what's underneath this nested collapse track, whatever you want to call it, you can actually just double click on it. And if you double click on the track, you will see there are the layers. The Avid calls it 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 because this is underneath V1. So sometimes it depends on the situation. Sometimes I'll step in. Sometimes I'll just double click to see what we got underneath here. So in this case, there's effects, right? So here's one thing to think about is this is an adjustment layer, and at some point I must have put a 3D warp on this adjustment layer and an animat, right? And that's why I'm double clicking it, or in theory I could step into it and see there is two effects on it and this clip, right? So in that case, it's not really a nested collapse track. This is just a clip that has two effects on it, which you could see by double clicking or stepping in. You could see the layers, the hierarchies of the effects. The difference between the collapse and the nesting is, in theory, you have multiple different layers. So let's see what I did here, why I have this here. Okay, on the bottom, I have a clip and I have it superimposed, maybe at 50% or something. Why did I do that? Yes, I have it at 50%. Oh, I know why. Because I had a title on the top. So without the superimpose, everything was too bright. The title got lost in there. So it made the video a little darker so you could see the title. Now, on V3, if I step in or if I just double click it, you're going to see a color effect that made it black and white. You're going to see a separate layer, which was what? I assume some sort of film effect. Oh, I know what it was. Okay, so on V2, I have an effect that makes the clip black and white. On V3, what I have is another clip, a background, a animation here, right? A full screen animation that I have an animat on, and I have what's called S layer, which is those blending modes type thing. I want to do a video on. There's a free way to get all these modes now in Avid called Blendex. It's a really cool tool. So we'll do that maybe next week. And so this is the thing. So instead of having the collapse track, I could have those layers out on its own in the Avid timeline, just like this, right? It's the same exact thing to have these two layers like this. Okay, so it's just about making your timeline maybe a little more organized. I personally really don't like to have much more than going up to V3, even with tons and tons of effects. I like to stay under V3. For this one, I didn't with the titles. In theory, I could have put the title on top of this layer right here, right? So even to show you, just to do that right now, if I took this title, make an add edit, and step in, and then make another track, put it on top, right? Move that up there, doesn't matter really. And now I have that title where it was on track V4. Now everything's under V3. So just something to think about as far as ways to manage your timeline. I personally don't like to see the timelines with 18 video layers of tracks. I get there's certain purposes for it, and especially you want to keep certain types of effects on certain tracks, especially when you're doing temporary work that you're going to replace later on. But, you know, something to think about when you're stepping in to the effects, right? There's a color effect underneath. Or when you're exactly what I did up here, you're collapsing tracks instead of, let's bring it back out here, instead of having the exact same three tracks, converting three tracks into one, right? Collapsing the footage, nesting, all these different terms, right? So hopefully that gives you a brief overview of what nesting and collapsing tracks means. Why is it so brief? Because it's time to drink. It's the weekend, and the beer I'm going to be drinking now is Super Session number 8. It's finally back after 2 years. Lawson's Brewing Company in Vermont has finally come back with this Super Session number 8. It's probably my favorite beer of all time. It's been 2 years since they've made this batch. They've changed with the number 2, 5, 4, 7, whatever it is, and finally they have number 8. So I will be drinking this nonstop for the next until they run out, until they stop making this number 8. If you know someone who needs to learn Avid from scratch, tell them to go to avidbeer.com. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.